Welcome to Semi-Retired with your hosts, Dave Farrant
and Richard Bonomo.
This week we're going to be taking a look at a really excellent science fiction TV series that Richard put me onto a couple of months ago called Severance, which is on Apple TV+. And Richard's going to start us off with an overview of the concept, and then we're going to get into it.
Thanks, Dave. So Severance, great show on Apple TV+, as you mentioned. Interesting concept, very apropos for those of us who have worked in corporate jobs where we'd like to sever our work life and home life.
Yeah, I've been there, yeah.
Exactly. And this is taken to the extreme, right? The characters on the show undergo a voluntary severance, which is a medical procedure that separates their working memories and their home memories, if you want. So innies and outies, right? The innies are the people that work and the outies are the people at home. And basically when you come to work, your memories are turned off and the memories of your work kick in.
Talk about your work-life balance problem, eh?
Yeah, exactly. They install basically a microchip in your head, and when you get into the elevator in the morning, you'll see their faces change as they go up the elevator. The microchip trips, and now they have only work memories, and they enter this corporate world where all they think about or all they do is work.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you get your head around the concept, it's really interesting. Like I found that as soon as I kind of, I twigged to what the basic idea was and they give it to you really quickly, I just started to think about how that would be how companies in today's world would do that for you sort of thing, right? I mean, you wind up with a person who's completely focused on work at work and has no memories of the day when they get home, so they can't even think, they can't even distract themselves with other memories. It's believably horrible.
Exactly. Think of the water cooler talk now. It's all about the water cooler. It's not about what you did last night because you have no idea what you did last night.
That's right, you didn't. Yeah, that's it. And you get that idea. I mean, again, I think by the end of the first episode, you sense the main characters experiencing this strange bifurcation, and it's weird. Beautifully weird.
It's very strange. I mean, as you mentioned, corporate would love this kind of thing. And you wonder why someone would go for a voluntary bifurcation or severance. And the story comes up that essentially the main character, Mark S, because we're not allowed to have their last names. Everybody is a name and an initial. Is grieving. His wife died recently.
Right. Yeah.
And so he, to avoid having to think about her at work, he volunteers to undergo the severance procedure so that when he's at work, he can not be overwhelmed by the emotions of
be maximally productive.
Exactly. Well, I'm sure that's not his plan. The company, I'm sure, says, yes, that would be great if you're not there crying and weeping in a corner thinking about your loved one. You might be doing more data refining.
Data refining. Richard, tell me more.
I wish I knew more.
What is data refinement?
So the four characters, Mark S, Helly R, Irving B, and Dylan G, work in the macro data refinement department.
Yeah.
It's a wild thing. It's never really fully explained what they do. They seem to collect little icons on screen and throw them into little boxes.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
It. Yeah.
And they're in like a big room, are they not? And they're just in a work quad in the middle of it, in this giant, empty, soulless room.
Exactly. Everything is very stark. We didn't even go to the set design yet, but their room is very, you're right, huge, and this weird it's almost like a four-leaf clover, not a four-leaf clover, but it's four desks.
Four-leaf clover, sure.
Yeah, arranged around a central pole that supports the desks, and they have these weird little cubicle walls that they can actually raise and lower to talk to each other.
That's right.
So you don't even have to stop working by looking over the cubicle wall as you would do in a cubicle farm. For those of us who have worked in offices with cubicles,
yes,
you can just stay at your desk looking at your screen and keyboard and lower the wall. And
it's got a weird, I think the visual vibe is really interesting. And you're like, tell me what you think, but it almost felt like it didn't feel like it was like contemporary. There's something slightly retro about it in a, almost like I felt there was almost like a 60s vibe to it, visually speaking. And yet oddly updated, kind of a mishmash. Do you know what I mean? Did you feel the same way, or did you see something different?
Yeah, exactly. Their clothes are modern clothes. I mean, let's say period of today kind of thing. And the haircuts, everybody's looks as if they are of today. But you're right. When you go into the building, it's very stark. The building itself is quite an element in the show itself. And I like the fact that as they come through the elevator, they walk through this endless series of white corridors with almost no signs. Every so often you'll see a little sign on the wall for a department, and it's almost as if it's an extension of the bifurcation, the severance of your work. So you've come to this place, you get in the elevator, the chip throws you off, you're now at work, and to get to your office, you go through a series of nothing.
Yeah, it's just total anonymity, right?
Yeah, strips away any image you have of work. You don't see Bob over here. You don't see Marcia over here. You don't see plants.
Yeah.
You walk through endless series of white corridors, and eventually you get to your door, and here's a giant room with desks in the middle.
Right.
Making you feel small.
And their whole world, I think, they have like a little cafeteria, kitchenette in the corner. So it's like they literally just need to exist. And presumably there's washrooms in there. We don't see them. But, presumably they just can be in that room all day, just, tapping away on their weird retro computers. And that's the end of it, right? By the way, we should mention the company's name is Lumen Industries. Yes. And that you alluded to the building. The set is actually the old Bell Laboratory in New Jersey. They use that for the exteriors, and there's some beautiful photography of the parking lot. Yeah. And it just contributes to that sense of total emotionless, cold corporate anonymity. Which is really, I think, pervades the whole thing.
Absolutely. Even when they do eventually go to other departments, every department on the Severance floor, which we should mention, is the fact that not all the building has severed employees, right? It's a giant corporation that produces something.
Yeah, I don't think we ever find out, do we?
No, we don't exactly. It's alluded to in a couple of episodes where someone mentions, don't they make blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of not clear if they're IT, are they manufacturing, are they what? Nobody seems to really...
Well, they refine macro data, we know that.
Exactly. Yeah. The set design, a very, very big part of the show in the way that it strips away everything and basically gives you no distractions, right? You're in that little room. The kitchenette also, vending machine with Lumon branded snacks.
That's right.
And you have 3 credits per day or something. You're allowed to have an X number of snacks or whatever. Weird. Like everything is branded Lumon. And I guess we should cover the whole philosophy of Keir, which is the founder, the big founder of Lumon, I guess. And
which they say has been around for 100 years, I think, right?
Something like that. Yeah.
It's like been an around. Old company, right?
Yeah. Think of Bell if you want.
Think of Bell, or
IBM or whatever kind of thing. This big corporate thing that controls whatever. We're not exactly sure. And Keir is often mentioned, the teachings of Keir's, the sayings of Keir, who's apparently the founder. There are statues of him here
there's a Christ-like reverence for the man, right? I think is what it boils down to.
Exactly.
Or some weird Central Asian dictator.
Yeah, exactly. You get that sort of feeling that you see in those banana republics where they insist on having gigantic posters of the leader. Or think of Saddam with those giant buildings covered in a giant photo of him. And, it reminds me a bit of the cars you would see. There was this craze, I forget if it's in the 80s or 90s, where all the cars would have like a banner at the top of the windshield that would say Chevy and Ford. Right. And I'm like, is the car having an identity crisis and it needs to be reminded of what it is?
Yeah.
It went away quickly, thank God.
Oh, thank God, yeah.
But so back to Keir, it's every so often some of the characters, especially if we look at the 4 main characters, Mark, Helly, Irving, and Dylan. Irving seems to be the one who has really drunk the Kool-Aid. He's constantly referring back to the teachings of Keir, the handbook, right?
Oh, the handbook, yes.
Yeah, which they make reference to. And you have Dylan G, who's like the company guy who follows the handbook, but is really in it for the perks, right?
That's right. The perks, the rewards.
The rewards, the melon parties.
Yeah, that's a strange thing, right? I mean, that's it. And there's this guy on the floor, Mr. Melchick, I think it is. He's the supervisor who will come in from time to time with strange, again, rewards for the team, like the melon bar. It's called the melon bar. That's it. Or there's a waffle bar.
The waffle party, yeah. If you reach what is it, a certain quota at the end of the period, the person gets a waffle party where you have this. You're seated later on in the season where you have waffles, and other things. We'll just leave it at that.
Melchik rolls them in on a cart, and these 4 people in this lonely kind of, sterile room have the waffle party around the waffle bar. It's just really, you sense again that it's like, it's form devoid of any function.
Yeah,
it's like they've stripped all the humanity out of it, and these people, they're excited, right? They're all Lumen team players, and they're looking forward to their melon bar. And and at one point also towards the end, I think it's 9 episodes.
Yeah,
9 episodes. That's right. There's a music dance experience to reward them for some particular accomplishment.
Exactly.
Maybe it's Helly doing her first macro data refinement. She finally gets it right because there's this whole thing going on. Yeah, so I think Helly, as a result of doing a particularly good job with her macro data refinement procedure, is rewarded with a music dance experience. And Richard, let us know what it is about Helly, what she's doing that that actually gets her this reward.
Okay, so you see that early on at one point, once Helly is introduced. We'll go back a little bit and talk about Helly also, the way the show starts very quickly without too many spoilers. So essentially they have these crazy looking terminals that look very, very retro when they're actually based on like a 1965 design of a computer, and they had the prop master build actual mock-ups of these things.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and it's got like a little CRT, maybe a 13-inch CRT in there, and there's a series of numbers, and they have their keyboard with a trackball, and the keyboard, interestingly enough, has no escape key. Yeah, so there is no escape. There's no escape from work.
No escape.
And there's a series of numbers, like a grid of numbers on the screen. And she says, "What am I supposed to do with this?" And he says, "Well, look at it, and eventually you'll see it. Some numbers are scarier than others."
Oh, that's right. The scary numbers.
And it's not quite sure. They only show it a few times, and they sort of gather the numbers. And there's like these little virtual boxes at the bottom, and they do a selection of numbers and they drop them in the box, and you've refined the data. But what it is, nobody knows. It's questioned at some point. We have no idea what actually they're refining.
Yeah, we don't know what the macro data is. We don't know what exactly. Yeah. We don't know what is being refined out of the macro data. It's a totally, disconnected procedure. So, you've got severed employees doing a severed kind of work process. It's got a strange vibe.
Exactly. And they do have a quota that they have to meet at the end of the period. I forget if it's a period or a month. And if they do, then you get rewards. If you don't, there's punishments. I think we should start early on when the show starts. We see Helly on the table, on a table in a boardroom, being awakened by a voice, which turns out to be Mark S. He's basically awakening her. She's just had the severance procedure and is not quite sure. And apparently this is the way all new severed employees are introduced to.
You wake up on a table?
You wake up on a conference room. Yeah, exactly. On a table with someone with a disembodied voice telling you, "Hello, can you please answer these 5 questions? And if you pass the test, you go on." Very strange. Doesn't quite adapt very well. Doesn't fully understand the whole procedure. Doesn't believe that she asked for the severance to happen to her, and that develops into one of the major plots in the story. At the same time, you have the very curious language that's often used in Severance, in that for the rewards, the rewards for certain things, but you also have things that sound very newspeak, 1984, very propaganda-ish, where if you've done something bad, and at some points they do certain things that they're not supposed to wander from their office.
Violations of the employee handbook, for instance, right?
Exactly. Crimes against Kier.
Yeah.
At which point, if you're found, to have broken the rules, you're sent to the break room.
Yes.
And when you think of a break room, when we go to a break room, in most offices or workplaces, you'll have a break room where you can go and sit and maybe grab a nap or a snack or whatever. Their break room is quite different.
Yeah, so when you go into the break room, in stark contrast to our concept of a break room, you're going there to basically confront and atone for your crime by repeating it over and over again until you've done so to the satisfaction of the person, the corporate representative who's in there with you. So it's it's just a really strange kind of mental haircut that's going on here, sort of thing. Again, whenever they aren't completely on course with what the company wants them to do.
And the corridor to the break room is quite interesting. It's super, super narrow and long, and there's a door right at the end. And then you go in and it's kind of dark and
that's right,
kind of thing. Yeah, it's odd. It's odd. There's often break rooms are hidden in the back of your warehouse or in the back of your office, right? So they've kind of taken that visual metaphor and given it a twist where you're taking down the long corridor where you're going to be broken.
Yes.
And in contrast, you have when corporate feels, because you're watched all the time. It's
needless to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Big brother is always watching you.
Exactly. Big Kier.
Big Kier.
Big Kier energy. You're watching. If they feel that someone is wavering and might need a little pat on the back, it's done completely separate from everyone. It's never done publicly. So you might be sent to a wellness counseling where you'll go to a room. The counselor's there and it's nice and subdued. It's quiet. It's got dark paneling. It might have a plant. And the counselor has you sit down and asks you a couple questions and then says nice things about you.
Oh, that's right. Based on your outie life, things you don't know during the day, she tells you. She said you love gardening, right?
Exactly.
You were a great guitar player.
Yeah.
And your innie doesn't know that.
Yeah. You're good with children.
Good with children. That's right. You're a great kisser. One of them gets told at one point, and he looks really happy about that. It's, again, just so weird, eh?
And what's interesting is that they're told certain things, yet they have no memories of these things.
Yeah.
Because and that's the part that's a little bit unclear. You're at work, your memories are severed. You have no memories of the outside world. So you in theory, don't know what the sun looks like. But certain things can be explained to you like, oh, you're good with animals, but there are no animals at Severance.
Right. So
you're
how
a
do you
good
even
kisser.
know what an animal is, right?
How do you know what a kisser is?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's odd. I'm not sure how that Severance procedure can allow you to have cognition, I guess, or
cognition, I think is a
certain
good word.
things,
Yeah.
but not memories of actually doing them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we know there's a season 2 coming. Maybe
exactly.
Maybe something that can be resolved.
Exactly. So back to the very corporate newspeak. I mean, it ties in a little bit to what we were saying about dictatorship and this kind of big corporate, the way they feel they have to remind you constantly of who they are, what they are, where you fit in or don't fit in with the paintings, right? We have the paintings every so often. A hallway will have a painting that expresses one of the sayings of Kier,
That's right. Put there by the optics and design department.
Yeah.
Love that.
Something.
Hey?
Exactly. And that's one thing where at one point they end up going for a walk and run into another department, not to spoil the season for those of you who haven't seen it, but it's interesting. What was it, Dave?
Optics and design.
Optics and design. And again, the title, once you find out what optics and design does,
Perfect.
it's just perfect. Exactly. So, you might have, and I'm making this up, this is not something that's in the show. You may have a saying from Kier that says to be a cog is to be joined to others or something silly like that. And
I like that. That's good. You're good.
I should suggest it.
You should, yeah.
And, you might have a painting that shows something or other, right? And you look at it and it's the kind of thing Irving would look at and say, oh, yes, Kier,
Yeah, they're allegories, right? They're allegories for Kier's life, I think.
Exactly.
Or scenes from Kier's life, I think.
Exactly.
Hey.
Exactly. And speaking of scenes, there's a point where they decide at one point, Mark, who's the section head. Actually, we haven't even gotten to poor Petey.
Poor Petey.
Helly comes in, we mentioned, as a replacement for Petey, who just isn't there. So Petey is an employee, and one day they come to work as the show starts, and Mark is told that Petey's no longer with the company, and Helly's the replacement. And what happened to Petey? Petey's no longer with the company. And that's essentially it. And At one point, they're feeling a little disjointed, so they decide to take the walk to go visit the, what is it called?
The Perpetuity Wing.
The Perpetuity Wing, where you walk
right.
in and you can see statues of the founders and the ancestors and
Keir and all of his descendants, right? Because they were all CEOs, right? It's a family company, I think we're given to understand, right? Keir and his children and grandchildren are all the CEOs. There's a lineage there.
Exactly. And I think you can even visit his little, just like a little diorama of his house, but you can walk in as
that's right.
Yeah. I think as part of reward, sometimes you can actually spend time there or whatever. But you get to immerse yourself in the Keirness of it to try to recharge your batteries.
Yeah.
Really, really, really weird. I mean, think of corporate retreats, right? Where you might have these one day things, team building. We're going to go rock climbing today at a rock wall. And while we're there, we're all supposed to feel closer to the company by this bizarre...
wearing branded T-shirts.
Branded T-shirts. And here's we're not going to take you rock climbing, and we're going to take you to the branding.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, absent the severance procedure, when you look at this, you realize that it's really not that far-fetched. There's a little bit of exaggeration here, and I think that's what makes great science fiction. It doesn't go completely off the rails. It posits a reality that you can imagine yourself being in, maybe with one difference, and that's the severance procedure. But all the rest of it, honestly, I feel like I've lived something like that in my life.
Absolutely. I've been to retreats. You may have even led the retreat.
I've been retreating my whole life.
Exactly. So yeah, it's very strange the way they take a lot of the everyday work kind of things and give them a little dark twist. And I think dark is the proper term for this as the series goes on.
Well, if you've seen Black Mirror, if anybody out there has seen Black Mirror, this is kind of coming from the same place, right? It's an extrapolation of current technology that you realize the dark negative world that it can create that nobody really wants, except maybe the employer.
So we've covered a little bit of the innie. We haven't talked about the outie world
the outie,
yet.
yes, that's right.
So in the outie world, our main character, Mark S., lives by himself in what seems to be possibly a company town where
it's right next to the plant, right? The Lumen plant, I think.
Yeah, it's a bunch of identical houses in this sort of...
Naturellement.
It has to be identical. No,
of course.
No individuality allowed. Where it seems to be, like a company town where this neighborhood would have been built for the employees to live in. Although all we ever see is one neighbor, we don't really see anyone else. So Mark leads his life kind of solitary, and we meet his sister and her husband.
Oh, that's right. That's the
Rickon.
Rickon. I love that. For some reason, I love that name, Rickon. It's just off speed a little bit,
Just like him.
Exactly, just like Rickon.
Yeah. So Rickon and his wife, which is Mark's sister, are just there. We're not quite sure what they do, if they earn a living.
Well, Rickon's written a book, hasn't he?
Well, that's it. Rickon's he's written a book that he's trying to get Mark to read, and Mark is a little bit hesitant about it because. Let's be honest, Rickon is sounds like a new age kind of guru wannabe
He's like
kind
some
of
kind
thing.
of transcendentalist or something, right? Yeah. And of course, outie Mark is still grieving his wife.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. They don't go into huge. I mean, we don't see him crying or anything, but there is that. And just to give you to set the scene a little bit, there's early on, Mark is his sister shows up at the house to pick him up to go to the event that obviously he's forgotten, and they're having a dinner party with no dinner. I don't know if you remember that early on.
The dinner-free dinner party.
The idea is you have guests at your and you sit at the table, and I don't remember if there's utensils, and they talk. You're having dinner time conversation, but there's no dinner. And the idea is to spark conversation. And it's one of those ideas you're like, really? Really? Yeah. Should I have eaten before? I think I really should have.
Makes me wonder if the world outside Lumen Industries is getting as weird as the world inside Lumen Industries,
Yes, a good point, because we're not quite sure if it's the future or what outside, because you don't see a lot of tech. You see a cell phone at one point when Mark runs into Petey outside, and he runs into this guy who says he's his best friend inside Lumon, and Mark has no idea who this guy is, and he hands him a cell phone.
That's right.
And it's a flip phone.
That's right. It's a flip phone.
Nondescript, nothing super fancy.
Yeah.
It's just a flip phone that he wants him to communicate with, and Mark proceeds to hide it in a box in the basement.
Yeah, there's almost a sense of like sort of stagnated technology. You know, you're right. You don't get the sense. I mean, you know, is it now? Is it in the future? You can't tell, but you do get a sense that, you know, that everything has kind of just become very, very regimented everywhere. You know, there's just a sense of repetition, like in the houses, obviously, as we've covered, you know, in the initial part of this podcast, in the behaviors and the designs of everything. But yeah, there's a real sense of rigid formality everywhere, and no sense of freedom.
Exactly.
Except the music dance experience. Sorry, I forgot.
Yes, which they have inside but not outside.
Yeah.
So what I found interesting also is the design. The everything at Lumon is very bright, sterile, and lit up. The walls are all white, except obviously in the wellness room and the break rooms where those are dark. But everything else, every other place you go to, everything is very, very, very fluorescent lights hidden in the ceiling, white walls. Yet when we're in the Audi world, Mark's house tends to be dark-ish.
So it is. You're right. I hadn't thought about that.
I mean, there's windows. It's not like I'm saying there's no windows, but it's a regular house, but everything seems to be dark. When he goes to Rickon, and I remember forgetting his sister's name, when they go to the dinner, obviously it's the evening, but there's multiple scenes where he's over there and it always seems to be dark when he's out. Obviously, I guess it's true because he's never there during the day because he's at work. It tends to be evening when they're there, but even then, the houses are not like brightly lit. Everything is not bright. It's odd that you would think work would be dark and home would be bright, and here we have a reversal of those kind of
everything's upside down.
Everything's upside down, exactly, which I thought was very interesting. And you don't see a huge amount of interaction. Most of the time he's in his house. He does go on dates. We see a restaurant at some point. His sister at some point is also at some sort of retreat because she's pregnant and she's going to give birth, and there's a whole scene there with someone there.
That's right.
Which ties in somewhat later.
Yeah. But we're not going to give that away, are we?
No, we're not going to give that away.
Yeah.
But all the scenes, obviously, he's at work during the day when it's bright, and he does call in sick one day, and he does drive around for something. We're not going to give it away. But I found it interesting that the separation of night and day. Yeah, and I think one thing to cover also is the pace of the show.
Yeah,
it's a very slow, methodical show. When it starts off, it feels very, very slow. You really, if you're expecting explosions and a Michael Bay or a Avengers kind of thing, that you're in the wrong place. It starts off slow and develops its characters, develops its scenes, makes you think about the whole thing. And as we get towards episode 7, pace starts to pick up. 8 starts to be a bit more of a jog, and episode 9 feels like it's going 100 miles an hour. Everything's happening all at once, everywhere. Which I found was very, very interesting to really draw you in slowly, because I think had they rushed too many things, they would have tried to jam too many, because you kind of got to wrap your head around the whole concept. As Helly does as she's lying on the table, so do we have to understand a little bit the separation of the two worlds and try to fit in so that it's not too much too fast. Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah. No, I think that's very well said, and you're right about the pace and the pickup. But you're talking 8 or 9 hours of solid entertainment here. Really good stuff. Can't wait for season 2.
Absolutely. And as I said, I had a friend of mine was watching it, and we were texting back and forth. And when it ended, all he said is "fuck." That's all I'm going to say. He goes, "When season 2?" And I think you can't say better than that. It really explains the ending is quite something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I guess we could mention that Ben Stiller is involved in this project, right?
Yes, exactly. I think he's one of the co-creators. He directs about half the episodes, which is interesting, and the other half is directed by someone else. I forget her name right now. I think it's a her. I'm not sure. Watch, we'll get in trouble for this one
Probably,
now.
yeah.
And what's interesting is the cinematography. We haven't discussed this, Dave, but I was reading an article about the cinematography was handed to it's a woman who does the cinematography or the director of photography, and it's a new project for her. I think she's like very hasn't done many things before, and really developed the whole way of its film. If you look at a lot of the filming is very static. We have long shots, we have wide shots, and then anytime they're walking, there's a lot of movement, and it's walking into the camera. You always see them facing the camera as they're walking. You can imagine the cameraman walking backwards.
Well, that's interesting. I'm going to watch it a second time. I'll keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that wraps up our severance. We can sever the topic.
Yeah, let's sever the topic. Yeah.
We can move on to this week's rant. And I think, Dave, it's your turn. What's pissing you off?
Well, I'll tell you what's pissing me off. And I'm glad to get this off my chest, quite frankly, Richard. I have a bee in my bonnet about certain expressions that people use in recent years and are used too often. And the one I'm going to pick on today is reach out. Reach out as opposed to, contacting somebody, emailing somebody, calling somebody, going to visit somebody. I don't know why this came into common usage. It seems to date back about 10 years. I actually looked it up on the internet, and it suggested that the genesis for this might be a series of TV commercials from the mid-'80s from AT&T, where you were suggested that when you used AT&T, you would reach out and touch someone, which I think was a beautiful tagline and great for an ad. But why do we have to reach out? Why, if I call Richard and say, "Hey, Richard,"
it's to touch someone.
Oh, maybe it's the time. Well, maybe that's it. See, now that would complete the process. But I think to myself, when I call for a pizza, I'm not reaching out for a pizza. I'm calling for a pizza. And when I call, my brother to say, "Hey," and catch up, I'm just calling my brother to say, "Hey," and catch up. And I think there's this sense I get that for some reason, there's a need to invest the simple activity of contact with more than it's worth. Like, I think if you say that, President, I'll pick this, I'm just picking anybody. If you said, okay, Prime Minister Trudeau reached out to the people of Japan after the recent assassination of Shinzo Abe, I would say, well, that's an appropriate use of reach out. He's a global politician on the global stage and wanted to extend our condolences. But, not for the everyday. Can't we go back to just contacting people, Richard? Isn't that just fine?
Yes, it is. It is. And it's odd because you tend to think of reach as a physical act. You don't reach with your voice. I mean, you tend to physically reach out and touch someone. It's odd that it's been co-opted into a verbal kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Well, at least it's not a reach around either, That'd be even worse. Reach around.
Reach around and touch someone.
Yeah, there you go. So that's my rant.
Good rant, Dave.
Thank you.
I guess we'll close out the episode. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Richard. Talk to you all next week.
Bye.